Terrorism is defined in international law under widely used definitions. Terrorism means the use or threat of violence against civilians to intimidate, coerce, or influence a population or government for political purposes. States often avoid the word terrorism for themselves and instead use the terms like military action, intervention, counterterrorism, and national security. However, international law evaluates actions by effects, not labels. Actions by the United States that scholars, courts, or human rights bodies have described as state terrorism or terror like. I'm going to mention some documented categories, not propaganda, such as bombing campaigns that targeted or predictably harmed civilians, such as Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia from 1955 to 1975, massive aerial bombing including Agent Orange, civilian threats, and deaths 2 to 3 million, long-term genetic and environmental damage. Purpose included breaking civilian support for resistance. Many legal scholars argue that this meets the functional definition of terrorism due to civilian targeting, psychological intimidation, and political coercion. Another example is Iraq from the year 1991 to present, the Gulf War with sanctions and invasions, destruction of water treatment, electricity, and hospitals, sanctions that caused hundreds and thousands of children's deaths, shock and awe documents explicitly aimed at psychological terror. The former UN officials resigned, calling sanctions genocidal. Also, they did regime change and covert operations with the CIA. For example, in 1953 with Iran, they overthrew a democratically elected government, installed authoritarian rules, resulted in decades of repression. In the year 1973, Chile backed coup against Salvador. They resulted in torture, disappearances, and mass fear. In the year 1980, Central America trained and founded death squads in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Nicaragua. They targeted civilians, priests, teachers, union organizers. The International Court of Justice in the year 1986 ruled that the U.S. violated international law in Nicaragua by supporting the armed groups and mining civilian harbors. This is one of the clearest legal findings against the U.S. Also, drone warfare and extrajudicial killings. Drone strikes, such as in Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia, and Gaza. Killing without trial, civilian casualties, including children. Signature strikes based on behavior, not identity. The special rapporteurs have stated that some drone strikes may constitute war crimes or acts of terror. Also, torture, detention, and psychological terror. The Guantanamo Bay. It was indefinite detention without charge, torture, waterboarding, and sleep deprivation designed to install fear and break resistance. There was also sexual humiliations, beatings explicitly intended to terrorize detainees. These acts violate Convention Against Torture, the Geneva Conventions, and the ICCPR. There was support by terror by proxy. The U.S. has armed militia, later designated as terrorist, supported governments using terror against civilians, provided weapons knowing that they would be used against civilian populations. Examples include Afghanistan in the 1980s, Saudi-led war in Yemen, and Israeli military actions condemned by the UN bodies. Why is this not called terrorism officially? Because international law lacks equal enforcement. Powerful states define the narrative. Terrorism laws are applied racially and politically. This double standard is central to many human rights complaints, including arguments that I have been developing about selective enforcement, structural racism, and criminalization of migrant versus immunity of states. You'll often see terms like state terrorism, imperial violence, structural violence, and crimes against humanity, war crimes. These are legally safer but describe the same harms. And if the same actions carried out by the US were done by non-state actors, they would almost certainly be labeled terrorism. This inconsistency is a core of human rights violations and a legitimate subject of special reporter submissions, ICC jurisdiction arguments, and civil rights and RICO style complaints.